Okay, well, everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. This is actually a presentation based on discussions that were happening both with clients and agencies over the last year here at HWL. And so I'm going to introduce us in a second, but this idea of the three newish truths and using the air quotes on purpose and the parentheses on purpose was because I can't say these are brand new ideas. This isn't anything that's super revolutionary, but it is something that just continues to come to the surface in every discussion that I have, that Devin has, that our delivery teams have when it comes to locums. And I think that today is a time in my 16 years of being involved in this business that the locums world is changing, I would say, faster than ever that I've experienced. Some of you may have different opinions of that, but frankly, the days of, and I know that Naoto and others talk about this, I was just there last week, that idea of a necessary evil in locums, that's not really what locums ever was. It's not what it was ever supposed to be. And I think that the view of most organizations is changing away from saying that locums are that necessary evil or something you don't want to do, or frankly, just too expensive. I think that is starting to move away a little bit, and it's becoming more of a realization that locums are not just here to stay, but when used properly, they are a huge value add within your overall delivery within recruitment and can really create a win-win-win strategy when you're working with the hospital, an agency, and that physician or provider. So without further ado, I'm going to dive in here. I just want to introduce, for those of you who do not know who HWL is. HWL is not a locums agency. We are actually a technology and process optimization partner to over 2,500 facilities, well, 2,800 now and growing around the country. We work in every labor category out there. But when it comes to locums, we have an entire dedicated team that knows this business, that helped us build our solutions and come from both an in-house and a locum space. Meaning that when we partner with organizations, we're not just taking a tech only. We really understand the process and the challenges and the things that the in-house recruiters are dealing with every day because our team members make up those types of individuals. So this just gives you a quick overview of us. We're not here to talk about HWL, but I think it's important that everybody that sees this does understand we have a great line of sight into what is happening out there, because we'll get the best of both worlds, frankly, from talking with an agency, because they know I'm not an agency trying to take their people, right? They give us a lot of great candid feedback. And then the clients do the same, because our job is to try to create that even balance and balance the equation, frankly, of how an agency works with the client and not get in the way. So this just at least lets you understand that we do have a lot of expertise in this area. And the reason that we've been spending the time having these discussions is we want to always be a better partner. Some of you that registered for today are people that I've had a chance to get to know over the last 18 months, 2 years, and hear from you some of the points that have come up on here, even outside of some of the more dedicated dialogue that drove some of these articles and questions. So first things first, this might be seen, and I think sometimes in presentations that I've done, other people that I've seen do presentations, this is kind of the sky is falling, right? Section of the presentation. It's, people are worried about, what's going on, why are candidates doing what they're doing? So what I and the team really tried to focus on when we get into this is not just, oh, here's one quick sound bite and that's it. It was, why are these things happening, right? When I first started in the business, I was in retained physician recruiting. Another one of those maybe bad words or necessary evils. But to think that 40 to 50% of candidates were open to doing PRN or locums work, that was outrageous. It was like less than 7% of candidates ever even considered going into this space. One of the things, right, that we've all seen over the last, let's just say, a decade, is a lot of talk and discussion around the different generational differences, right? When I'm at an ACHE meeting, it used to all be about the traditionalists, the baby boomers, the Gen Xers, right? Now it's moved into millennials and Gen Y and Gen Z, and everybody wants something different. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But I think that from the discussions that I have had, that is one big thing that has driven candidates is that they're now open to not just that traditional style of work, right? So the gig economy is something that everyone talks about. No, doctors and providers are not Uber drivers. They're not, you know, shipping people, right? They're not somebody that can just turn on and turn off work. But I think the desire that we've consistently heard, both from agency feedback, client feedback, and frankly, talking to just providers that we know, has really been around, don't take this the wrong way, facilities that are on here, but the inflexibility that has been offered to these professions. So locum started to take off during my career, at least, because hospital A was just unwilling to look at a 4-day work week in primary care, right? Whereas now in perm recruiting, that's a very standard type of model. So it started to drive people over to agencies that said, well, I can send you here, then I can send you there, then I can send you there. And it created this work-life balance that got rid of a lot of the bureaucracy or challenges that these candidates faced every single day in their minds, in their frustration for not being able to get that perm job they really wanted. Second thing, of course, is burnout. We've all talked about this ad nauseum. We're not doing a presentation on burnout today, but if you look at that and you look at the realities and the different layers, right? I mean, there's, moral injury is another one that is being talked about heavily today. That all factors up into the idea of burnout and why people are saying, I can't do this 24/7. I can't be in rural America and be the only surgeon who's on call every day, all day, 365. I need to have a little bit of a different lifestyle, or I am in a market that's not paying me what I feel I should get. So I want to pick up a job in order to go ahead and be able to supplement my income. I think what's interesting to me is surveys over the years that I have been involved in the business, and Devin will be able to chime in a little bit once I introduce her on what she's experienced in her career from speaking with candidates on an in-house perspective. But the reality is that initially the idea of locums was to give back, right? It was to do the definition, to hold one's place. They were going to rural America, like when these companies were founded and the industry was founded, to hold a place for somebody that was out on medical leave, out on maternity leave, maybe doing a mission trip. There was a lot of reasons that people did it, but it wasn't just so they could supplement their income. And so seeing those responses in surveys, no matter which survey you talk about, to see that growth year over year has been, I don't want to call it shocking, but I think it's enlightening for organizations to understand if you can get a little bit more creative on that front end, if you can come up with work-life balance schedules, if you can come up with ways to keep these people in your communities, you could reduce your usage of locums externally. For you, any agencies that happen to be on here, that's not a dig or a negative thing. It's just a reality. Everybody is trying to balance things out, right? And when we look today, it's not just the candidates, it's also, the health systems and the challenges that the health systems are facing. So let's think about consumerism. Let's think about not just all that retail entrance, but the telehealth entrance. Let's think about reimbursements. Let's think about value-based purchasing. Let's think about, somebody that says my costs are too much to have people inpatient. I need to get much more of that outpatient for better reimbursements. All of these things have been bubbling up behind the scenes for years that we can almost throw COVID out in certain ways. Some of you might say that's a little blasphemous because COVID certainly was an unprecedented challenge we faced. I personally don't think we wouldn't have had these challenges if COVID didn't happen. So I was at a conference last week and then one the week prior that were both sides of the coin, right? So one side was being in an agency organization that is focused on locums, focused on leading the charge and doing things the right way and all of that. And the other was a health summit with executives and leaders from the hospitals and health systems talking about what they're facing. What's interesting to me is everybody, for the most part, is trying to come up with a solution that helps that win-win-win strategy, which is great. But I think there is the disconnect is candidates and what an agency deals with, health systems, patients, and what they deal with. I think we're still missing some of the interconnectivity that can happen through more dialogue and discussion. And the reason that I highlighted why the world is changing here is if you compare these, great, staffing became the number one concern, not great, of CEOs in 2022. You can go back and look at the Becker's article. It's the first time it ever happened, right? Is that a COVID thing? Or was that just a general issue that we're facing within healthcare delivery? My humble opinion is that that is just something we are facing. When a hospital typically was at about 60%, on average 50 to 60%, depending which report you read, of all expenses being labor costs pre-pandemic, that's a scary thing to think about because of all the shortages and items that we face as an industry, right? You can look at physicians, you can look at nurses, you can look at allied, you can look at nurse practitioners, physician assistants, and CRNAs. There is not a category that has a positive projection of staff by 2030. Everyone is showing a shortage. So this is why, to me, no matter of COVID or not, no matter of these spikes and market resets that have to occur in the nursing and allied space, locums to me is even more of a linchpin in delivery now because of all of these shortages. The candidates know that they have more power than they've ever had before. There are some candidates that during COVID realized this for the first time and leveraged it. Higher pay, picking their own schedules. I'm leaving perm employment to do this. I'm not saying that's wrong, but I'm also not saying that that's the reason that staffing became the number one concern of CEOs. To me, this has been a decade plus in the making because we have not gotten to a point where we have the nurse educators to go back and teach, where we have enough people or enough residencies and medical schools. I think we're still, don't quote me because I didn't pull it before the call, I think we're positive net one in medical schools. There are some cool new advances that are being done to increase residency slots, fill gaps where residencies or fellowships have been kind of unmatched and maybe going to waste a little bit. So we're trying to make some of these progressions. But sessions that I've sat in from a state level, from other levels that talk about fixing that gap or narrowing that gap, it tends to fall back to getting people to practice at the top of their license, right? And so now what has that done? Over the last number of years, it's led to 80, 90, 95%, depending which study you read, of healthcare organizations using locums in the last 12 months. And you see that gap, it's been anywhere from 85 to 95, just depending on who's put out the study for the ones that I've read. Some of you may have some other numbers too. But I think the reality is even if someone says they've never used a locum, they may have probably used somebody on a PRN status in their community. Because my gut tells me that more than likely 100% of organizations have had to use some sort of a physician or provider temporary staffing position, right? But how do we take and mirror this up from the health system perspective to the agency perspective to the candidate perspective? And I think that comes to a holistic approach, which we're not going to get into today. There's a lot of sessions out there about how recruiting is changing. And I'm sure as we get into 2024 and AAPPR and MAPRA and other events, we're going to see more presentations on that. And I'll touch on it a little bit later after we cover a few other points. But perm recruiting and locums are not separate. When I was in the locums world, and this was, I don't want to date myself too much, but probably 7 or 8 years ago, maybe a little longer now, I wrote an article about how using locums can be part of a perm recruiting strategy, right? Because if you can break down those silos, you can not only take those perm positions, which a lot of people report about is what percentage is being used for locums coverage during perm recruiting, but you may not need all those positions. You may be able to customize it a little bit and have a 4-day or a 3-day work week, or you could have different hours. You could customize for lifestyle events that don't make one employee a full-time FTE and another a 0.7, right? All those discussions that you all as experts have had throughout your careers, if we can break down these silos, that was the thing that frustrated me when I came into healthcare 16 years ago, was it's like one side of the table was doing something and I could talk to them about that. Then the middle group was talking about this. The right side group was talking about this. and even the C-suite wasn't really rolling it up together. So we're going to get to how some of that is changing. To me, the core of this, the reason that this is timely for both the health system and for agencies and candidates, but just really thinking about the delivery mechanisms, is that the most recent report from Moody's is at a third or a 3% margin or less. If you look at the recent Becker's article from this week, you're at 1.1, 1.2% margin for the average hospital in this country. There are still plenty of people running at a negative. Yes, some of that has to do with staffing. Yes, some of it's got to do with patient care delivery. Yes, some of it has to do with reimbursement or having, very low self-insured or, professional insurance and just being on Medicare, Medicaid. But it's a bit of a perfect storm. But at the center of it, if you really peel this back and the discussions that we've had over the last year, as we put some of these articles together and some of the thoughts for today's presentation, it does come down to, we got to figure out how to make our staff work well together with the patient, see the patients and meet the patients where they are, and just keep everybody engaged in the overall process. So now when we think about why does it matter, right? It's just those key points I talked about: finance, increased engagement, increased hires, and overall delivery. But it's led us to a very interesting push-pull, in, again, my humble opinion, that the recruitment teams of the health systems, agencies as well that are partnering with them, but for you all as MAPRA members and AAPPR members, and those of you that are sitting in the in-house seat every day, the push-pull, from my perspective of sitting on the outside, has gotten harder and more intense than it's ever been. So one of the things that we talked about with each person that we met with on these topics was, well, what is different now? Why are you having this? Well, first things first, there are more people involved, okay? And finance matters more today than it ever has. I know we've always talked about costs and cost benefit analysis and ROI, but the reality is, with people losing tens or hundreds of millions of dollars quarterly at this point, finance is going to be a linchpin. And the people that we met with said they are being held more accountable fiscally than they ever have been. And you've seen it with recruitment teams, and it doesn't even really matter if we're talking about HR-driven teams, physician alignment teams, medical group teams. There have been cuts. You have to do more with less. We need more, delivery. We need more recruits, et cetera. You see it every day. A health system had to close a department. They had to end OB services, and they always tie in their staffing challenges. If you go back and read the last probably 10 articles about OB or unit closures, staffing is mentioned. And it's usually within the first paragraph because that's kind of the buzzword. But now the physician recruitment teams, when we think about the physicians and advanced practice providers in particular, some of you are amazing at tracking your ROI. You know, when you go post a job, what that translates into. You know how long it's taking to make that fill. You know, if you add $5,000 to your investment, that it has brought your time to fill down by 10%. Others have never been tasked with that. And that's not a negative. It's just not something that your system brought you up with and made you accountable for. Well, now, unfortunately, we all know the frustration is you now have to fix this in 2 minutes. You now have to tell me, what is your reporting? How much did you spend here? How much did this cost? Myself and some of my team were recently at another event in Savannah, where a physician recruitment leader from a very large health system in this country talked about using data, and we're going to touch on that. But really, it all mattered back to finance, because she was having to justify every penny she spent and why she spent it. So then let's take that finance piece. Let's move that out. That is a challenge. Being held accountable for finances that you never were, of course, is a challenge. But let's think about our site, unit, medical group management leadership that have always thought. And I've spoken at MAPRA before. I know a lot of the members there. I'm fortunate to, over my years, work with many. It's always been a push and pull with last minute needs. Oh, I need a cardiologist. I need a microflap ENT. Why are they not filled in 5 minutes, right? It's always been that push-pull, but it's just getting worse and worse and worse. Part of that has been physician contracting. Having been in the perm world, I have seen contracts get easier on the candidates in order to get them to say yes. Shorter out clauses, easy to term. Oh, hey, Trevor's leaving because, his wife got this other job. We're just going to let him go. That's fine. Maybe because Trevor really was a good provider for you, right? And he really was moving out of town. But now we've got problems where you've set a precedent where it's now caused John and Susie and Dr. Jones and Steve and all these other people to now say, hey, Trevor got out of his contract with less than 90 days notice. I'm leaving. Well, they may not be leaving to leave town. They might be leaving to go do locums assignments or a retail assignment or go work for a pharmaceutical company because they just are tired of being short-staffed. So these site leaders, one of the things that our feedback was from recruitment leaders was that, hey, the beauty is if we use locums the right way, and it's not just reactionary, it's not just last minute, we can prevent some of that loss and some of those physicians and providers from leaving us because they're happier. I had one institution tell me that they were really, really struggling because of the call coverage that they were facing in a couple specialties. So they used locums for call coverage. And it made their providers happy. And guess what? They were able to interpret. They didn't lose those providers because they answered that main pain point. And I think we've all seen it. There's always a reason someone will leave. I've had to recruit people because someone wouldn't give them a parking spot. I've had to replace somebody. So yes, that's a little bit of a funny one-off, but it's the reality. And if you can use a locums in the right way, I think what's happened today is, again, that shift from necessary evil to, wait a minute, if we do this the right way, this can be a big win here across the board. I can make my people happy, focus on retention and delivery, not have to recruit 4 or 5 new people, and be able to move forward to the next step, right, of just maybe expanding and those types of things. The other thing that has come in, or came out, I should say, of these discussions is because of COVID, because of financial stability, there is a lot more inconsistencies in the message. We'll get to the CXOs next, but inconsistency in the overall messaging, right, of what the needs are. Do we have enough patients to cover the recruiting? Are we reviewing our analytics enough to understand what's happening? Are we going to be downsizing, right? Are we going to be, having to cut back services, that expansion we plan? We don't need those 5 physicians that we talked about. These things are not something that can truly be controlled. But again, I think, at least what it sounded like in our discussions, is that if you can be a little bit more holistic about your overall approach, and I'm going to have Devin share some of the things that she saw sitting in the in-house seat when we get to the next section here, that is the way you preempt some of this so that they don't become such a challenge and your site leaders don't get so upset. You guys have all gotten phone calls from that department saying, I needed that person yesterday. Why didn't you do it? Now I've got to spend all this money for locums. If you get ahead of it, I think the site, department, medical leaders, et cetera, are probably the easiest to win over if you just explain to them why you're doing what you're doing. So now let's move to the next section where it's the C-suite. The CXOs more and more and more are getting involved. Having sat on my side of the table over these last, decade plus, I've never had so many CFOs involved in locums discussions, ever. Any program I do, the CFO, the COO, the executive director of the medical group is also in the room saying, what is this going to mean for us fiscally? First challenge that this brought up is locums are not nurses or allied professionals. No offense to them at all. Nursing and allied has been much more commoditized over their entire careers and kind of had set pay bands and everything else. And as the C-suite started to move themselves into these dialogues, the question would become, how much money are you going to save? Okay. I think we all know cheapest provider, cheapest doctor, cheapest anything is going to be the most expensive in the long run, right? But when the C-suite comes in and they're challenged with how do we cut 20% in our spend? How do we save? I have clients right now that part of our initiative, they need to save 30, 40, 50, 300 million, depending on the size of the organization across the board to fix those margins, to not have to do layoffs, to not have to close, to not have to shut down units. These pressures came in hot and fast once they saw a bill. And they said, wait a minute, Dr. Jones, she was working here for 6 weeks and we paid her how much money? This isn't acceptable. So it goes back to that knowledge base and the understanding of everybody under the sun of how do we fix this? Well, we don't fix it by slash and burn. We fix it by taking a much broader view and saying, where do these locums fit in care delivery? How does that affect our HCAP scores or value-based purchasing reimbursement? How does it affect? Maybe we shouldn't just hire 25 people because we know we want to go into a competing market. Maybe we should hire 5 and supplement with locums. So I think the push-pull has changed. It's always been there. It's always been reactionary versus proactive. More players involved, I just think causes and ups the frustration and confusion, because you'll get a phone call from the COO, from the CFO, from a site leader, and you're having to answer to 3 different people. So what I'm going to do next is I'm actually going to go ahead and introduce, now I have to say, Devin, as I introduce you, it's going to be former director over at LifeBridge Health. Devin has actually joined the HWL team this year, but Devin has a vast background within healthcare. She did not, like most of us. We didn't come into this being physician recruiters or saying that's what we want to go after, right? She had other roles within the organization, and through reorgs and restructurings that they had at LifeBridge, got put into this role. And that's when Devin and I first met, I think, geez, what are we, 5, 6, 7 years ago? I can't remember exactly how long, but she ran that entire team, ran the restructuring, ran a lot of different initiatives for LifeBridge. So we invited her here today to give you a leadership perspective that builds upon all the interviews and discussions we had throughout the last year, so that she can talk through some of the things she dealt with day to day. And then after we're done here, we're going to move to the 5, really 6 key questions that came out of all of these discussions. So Devin, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. And yes, I was the former director at LifeBridge Health. I was with the company for 11 years, and in 2019, I was given the role of director. We had never had that before, so I was tasked with hiring 30 full-time physicians and APPs, and then I was also locums was put on my plate. And honestly, I really didn't know much about locums at that time, but I was tasked with going to every single specialty director department and figuring out what needs they had as far as full-time, and then also what their locums needs were. And I was told after a year I could hire a team, and then COVID hit. So I was furloughed for 4 months. And then when I came back, I was in a very different world all around. So I had to go back to all of those leaders and figure out what they were doing. And again, to Trevor's point, a lot of times locums was a knee-jerk reaction and a panic. So we were trying to find strategies for figuring out when you needed locums, why you needed them, how much you needed them, and what you needed them for. And I found it to be challenging sorry for the agencies that are on here, I love you all, but sometimes that's challenging for someone in the director role of physician recruitment, as well as all of the directors around the organization. And so I went to my MAPRA and my AAPPR contacts and said, how do you handle locums? I went to so many people that I respected in both of these organizations, asking questions and trying to figure out the best way to do things. And they did say to me, a VMS is a really good way to manage the locums. You get a handle on what everyone in the organization is doing and under one roof. I think that was one of our struggles, was that we had different agencies working with different specialties, and in that there were different contracts with each different director. So someone would come to me and say, oh, I want to hire this person full time. Okay, well, that's going to be $100,000. Or, there just was no consistency in what we were doing throughout the organization. And then every month I was also tasked with giving presentations to leadership on what we were spending and how to reduce that. And so I was, part of my bonus was on reducing locum spend. And for me, I thought, well, I don't even know why we're spending money on these locums, so how am I supposed to be the one that's going to reduce that spend? But I had to figure out a way to do that as well. So it also helps to have everything in front of you, easy to see, and easier, I should say, to work on a plan to reduce the locum spend. And so I agree with Trevor completely. I mean, we were not willing to give a 4-day work week for internal medicine physicians. And so we didn't hire any, and that was a huge problem. So I do think that the future of locums, they're not going away. I think there's definitely a way to figure out how to get them into the organization and make it more of a benefit and not something where you're looking at it like it's a necessary evil. So I am happy to answer any questions as to why I went with HWL. I know that's not why we're here today to talk about our company specifically, but I just can't say enough things about how great it is to have somebody on your side also to tell you which agencies are the best to work with. It also gets all of the contracts. You have, one fee for temp to perm. So there are a lot of benefits to it.
Yeah, and you guys will all have at the end of this, Devin's and my contact will be up there. Again, we're going to send out a copy of the recording as long as I didn't mess that up and it is recording properly. And that will allow you guys, if you do have those questions, because, Devin obviously, is a big advocate for what she saw, and it actually had her join us, which, we feel fortunate about. But where I want to kind of go to next for our last probably 10, 15 minutes here is really the 5 key questions that came out of all of these discussions. Now, when I say this, I didn't have people give me their top questions, right? This was basically taking the discussions, the feedback, and coming up with the key points that showed up in our minds, right? As a company and talking to them, you're going to notice this is not a typo. I do not like lists with 5 ways to fix this, 3 ways to do this, the top 10. These are all important. In my mind, there are also, you guys may have read some of the books or things by other authors that do the same thing that kind of inspired me, but not one of these is less important than the other when I'm really thinking about healthcare delivery and the use of locums. First things first, and I don't like reading slides, but I'm going to read each question. Am I siloed with permanent and locums usage decisions? I would say in the MAPRA membership, the team could correct me if I'm wrong. I think I know one that really has a true dedicated locum side to their team. The rest of you are having to balance the equation of perm and locums, right? You're having to justify why you're doing one or the other. Why are you increasing salaries? Why are you using locums? Why couldn't you fill that urologist that's on a 1-on-1 call at $185,000, right? You have to justify each of these. And so the reason this is a key question is if you create that holistic approach, you can find a way to better position that back to the C-suite or the whoever you're answering to in order to help educate them on this. I've seen this work very, very well with some of our partners who maybe have reported up into HR that didn't understand the physician and provider space as well. They kind of looked at it more as just recruiting a nurse. Again, not a negative on nurses. We all know it's not the same. The time to fill a perm physician has continued to go up. The acceptance rates of these candidates, because they get so many offers, has continued to go down when you compare the surveys year over year over the last at least 5 years. The second point here is, do I even know who is using? I can tell you from experience, when someone tells me they're using X dollars in locums, I historically have been able to say, well, let's just go ahead and add 20% to that and be right. Because even if you have and I'm going to use air quotes again for a reason, centralized process that you believe all your locums are being sent to you or signed off, there is going to be rogue spend. I've seen people that have said, I use no locums. And I can tell you I did this when I was with an agency. I had an organization say, I don't use locums. So, well, you spent $5 million with us last year. Here's the data. Needless to say, that CFO called me and I was on a plane the next day to go visit them because they didn't understand how that happened. But it's key to understand who is using. That leads us into the analytics to understand market rates, but also the data of who is using and why, right? You need to track those things. And that is to Devin's point, where a VMS, we're not here to talk about HWL, can come into play, but I will show you a graphic that I've made next that can help talk about how you can reposition yourself. Market rates today have historically been set buy just what an agency is saying the doctor needs to come in at. I think as we've seen more and more agencies come into the fold, more companies start locums agencies, more people get involved in this industry, the days of the stranglehold of an agency being able just to say whatever they want to say the rate is and get it is starting to go away, whether you have a VMS or not. As long as you're not only relying on one company or one or two companies to only give you your locums, you're not even looking at somebody else, you typically at least get better insight. Now, today, though, it's more important to understand that insight. We don't have the transparency to know what is the provider or physician paid versus the bill rate. But I think there's enough data and experience and analytics out there within this MAPRA group and others to at least be able to have an open dialogue with each other. And MAPRA is amazing about your membership talking to each other to understand where they should be. You're never going to get a set rate every single time. And if your goal is that every FP is going to be at this number, every hospitalist is going to be at this number, I hate to tell you, my humble opinion, I'm not telling you you're wrong, is that it's going to be a very difficult hill to climb. Because you set a static rate sheet and something happens and we have another anesthesia bubble like we do right now. I remember when CRNAs were getting $125,000 in a perm salary. Yeah, try that now. We're looking at 300 or more at times in rates, depending on where you are in the country. So I think that you just want to have the fluidity, but you need that data to understand. The next is, do I truly have tracking and understand what the approval process is? This is one that came out in a lot of these discussions that I would say was probably because they were talking to me or talking to my team here at HWL, because frankly, that's part of what we're here for, is to capture that spend. You know who's using, you know why they're using, you track it, everyone's held accountable, we can build budgets off of it. So to me, it's different than just knowing who's using, but what's your approval process? Because I've had CFOs call me and say, what is this? You know, why is hospitalist using this much? We just recruited 25 of them. I'm like, I don't know. I can't answer that question for you. But let's go find out together. And then we go back and we do some work and we realize, well, yes, you did hire 25, you lost 10, you got people not working full 7-on, 7-off schedules. They've negotiated 5 and 5s. And so you just don't have a true FTE when you're making these hires, even though you're paying them that way. Last thing first, I guess, is there a financial benefit? Your agency partners, the ones that are reputable, the NALTO members, the ones that have been around for a while, and even some of the new startups, realize they need to show value in what they're bringing, right? And so they're able to help you understand, well, how do you get them credentialed with the payers? How do you make them so that they can bill for the services? How do you use them properly on the different capacities that you're using them? This really is key. I mean, it matters, right? If you're going to use somebody, if you're going to make this investment, if you're going to create that holistic approach, there better be a financial reason to do it, or your CFO is going to breathe down your neck. This leads me to the sixth question, and this is probably the more selfish one, is do you have a system of truth to track everything? If you think about where locums is today versus where it was years ago, when I was in the locum space, I will be 100% transparent with this group, as I always am. I was the guy that company sent around to not do VMS or MSP programs because they were not set up the way they are today. The data wasn't there. It was a nursing solution or a commercial solution just shoehorned in to try to provide coverage, and it just didn't work. It caused more issues, more bottlenecks, lack of engagement from agencies, and it just became a cluster for everyone involved because you didn't have accountability. So today, technology is here and it's here to stay. You look at health systems, 85% or more, depending on which study you look at, use a VMS or MSP for nursing and allied and non-clinical. You can kind of throw them all together, depending, if it's an SIA report or something else you read. Locums is probably about 20%. The studies have been a little more kind of off. You'll see 15, you'll see 20, you'll see 30. I mean, I saw one that said 35, but I don't agree with that just from what I do every day. But it's coming. The world of technology engaging in locums for both the agency side as well as the client side is coming, and it's coming fast. We see it, of course, every day in what we do, but it comes down to not just, is it a tech? It's about really regaining control, right? It's how do I know? Sorry, I think I have a timer on that one that I did not realize. So it may not stick, but when we show this out, you can see it. The recruitment team needs to be here. You all need to be the top of the pillar, okay? You guys are truly the ones that drive this. I've advocated for this for years in presentations that I've had too many times. The internal recruitment team is not brought to the table the way you should be. You should be there from day one. When you are planning out the medical staff development plans and everything else, if you're not in that room, I'm not saying force it, but try to find a way to show the value of bringing you in and getting you there day one. Then this is where tech and solution comes in. Yes, shameless plug for HWL. I agree. But the reality is it doesn't matter if it's HWL or another tech, okay? There is huge value add in using technologies. Maybe what you're doing is you're using your ATS. Maybe you're using another VMS. Maybe you are using some other reporting from a partner that you have and how you post your perm jobs. And maybe that shows you, man, it's taken me a long time to fill this core component of my needs. I need to start using locums to fill that so that I can drive some revenue. There's a lot of ways that you can use tech, but tech should be here to empower you and allow you to hold people accountable and hold yourself accountable. Because I can tell you, there are times where agencies are really working their tail off to do the best they can for you, and it's internal challenges, nothing that the agency is doing or being blamed for, that are causing those problems. So that's where tech comes in. The other, I don't know if it's a buzzword is the right term, but internal program modeling, insourcing, internal resource pools, these are all things that have been out there for years. Some of your systems may even use more of a localized PRN program. And I'm not talking about just having a hospitalist group running your hospitalist, right? And not using a large national outsource management company. I'm talking truly about Dr. Jones and Dr. Stevens who are in your community picking up shifts, filling in when needed, doing Mondays and Wednesdays every week. There are ways to use technology. It's something HWL does, of course, to manage that side of it. And again, see that holistic view so that you really know, well, Dr. Jones and Dr. Stevens are covering this. I may not need that fifth primary care hire. Because if I use the nurse practitioners and physician assistants to the top of their license, if I use Dr. Jones and Dr. Smith, I can get all the coverage that I need on a PRN model. And so I can save the money from that additional salary or from a full-time locum. And then the last thing is the external agency management. And saying last thing is probably a bit of a misnomer there. Agencies should not just be your last resort, right? They should become your trusted partner. You should have people that you believe in. You should be able to make a phone call and say, Devin, hey, it's Trevor over at XYZ. I need some help here. I'm trying to forecast for 5 months out from now. I'm going to have some holiday coverage expectations or holiday coverage gaps. What can you do to help me now? Because then it creates the win-win environment for everybody, really win-win-win, because you got to include the physician and provider. So this, I think, truly, though, is where we are today. Health systems that talk to us, the people that we surveyed and talked to during this process, both formally and informally, said we have got to find a way to be more in control of what's happening, but not at a detriment to what other people are trying to accomplish. So I'm going to kind of leave it here with this last visual for you. We do have some time. We've got about 10 minutes left. That if people do have a question, I know that not everybody was able to attend. I said in the beginning of this, I got a few text messages from people that couldn't get in. I will take the blame for that. But this is my contact and Devin's contact. We're both available to you. You can drop us an email. You can reach out to Devin to understand what she saw when she was on the in-house side. You can reach out to me about anything that I can do to help. The thing that I know Devin does as well that I love about MAPRA, you guys are always very willing to talk to each other. You're very, very willing to share information, and not just internally amongst the in-house team. You guys have all embraced me over the last decade of getting to know you all by sharing information with me, participating in things like helped us build this session here today. That's an amazing thing that you all have that has been built by the executives throughout time within MAPRA. So I congratulate you all on that. I hope that, and I'm sure I speak for Devin too, we hope you at least picked up a nugget or two from this today. we will send out a copy. Worst case, if I did mess up the recording, I'll send out at least a copy of the deck to you, along with one of the other articles we wrote since this was developed, and we hope it's helpful.